Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor to host this legacy of Steven Larsen's Zoom series. And as you know, Steve and I were doing a series of podcasts, and then COVID came along and kind of put an end to that endeavor, at least for the two of us being in the same room together anyway. And at that time, of course, back in March, February, whenever it was, many of us had not even heard of Zoom at that time. But now, thanks to Zoom, we're able to do this. And I think it's tremendous. So let's get started. Steve, today we're going to explore what we call the early years. So let's think back about 30 years ago. Lots of things happening at that time. Of course, we had the reunification of Germany. We had the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope. Let's see, what else? Oh, we had the first web server was created. But most important of all, we had you coming to Rockford. And so my question is, of all the places, why Rockford, Illinois for Steven Larsen?
Well, that's a really good question, because I'm going to tell you something you might not believe, but I always had this feeling that there was something in my future involving Rockford. And I don't know why. I have no idea. I'd only been to the town once, maybe twice. But just something told me that Rockford was in my future. I had actually applied for the music director job in 1985 when Charles Bornstein was hired. And by the way, I never received an acknowledgement for that application, never got a return letter saying thank you for your application or anything. But 5 years later, when it came up again, it didn't dissuade me. I applied again. And this time with a little bit more success. I found myself fighting an uphill battle, though, and having to talk my way into the job, because at the time I was the artistic administrator and principal conductor of Chicago Opera Theater. And anybody who, in the music business, in the conducting business, knows that the best way to learn conducting is to conduct opera. But if you're not in the opera world, you don't necessarily know that. So I was dealing with people who thought, well, he's not really a symphony conductor, he conducts opera. So I had to do a lot of talking people into, no, you really got to just check this out. I think that I'm the right one for the job. So I made it through a few interviews, and I was told that each time that they did an interview, the rest of the people who weren't on my interview said, now we're going to cut him. And the two people who were interviewing me said, no, you're not. You can't cut him. We've got to keep him in the mix. So it finally boiled down to three people. One dropped out at the last minute, and two of us auditioned, conducting a rehearsal of the orchestra at the Midway Theater. And I got the job.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sort of reminds me of going through selecting a new NFL football coach for a team. Very similar. And here you are, 30 years later. Did you think you would be here this long?
No, I thought maybe 5 years, maybe 7 at the most, and move on to somewhere else. But everything kept getting better all the time. And I thought, why do I want to go somewhere else when things keep getting better here? I knew I had colleagues who had gone on to bigger orchestras and who ended up with terrible labor problems with the orchestra's running out of money and all sorts of problems. And so I thought, oh no, I don't have those problems here. We're doing well. So I thought, I'm just not going to look much further. Now, it did happen that, let's say, in 1993, I got a call from the Champaign-Urbana Symphony asking if I would be interested in taking over as their music director. And So that ended up working out okay because, of course, this was my principal job, and I could just drive down to Champaign when I needed to for rehearsals for concerts. So I did that for 17 years.
Well, you did talk about it briefly, but can you maybe give us a little more detail about what you were doing before you came here?
The Chicago Opera Theater, still in existence. It's gone through some turnarounds, and it's a much different looking company than it was back then, probably for the better. But Chicago Opera Theater was the second opera company in Chicago, of course, behind the Lyric Opera. And we performed operas in English, did 3 of them usually in the course of a year in the spring season, 7 performances apiece. And typically an opera would take about 2.5 to 3 weeks to rehearse. And then you'd spend a week doing performing. So, 4.5 weeks all total of very concentrated work. And conducting, if you're conducting the opera, conducting every day, sometimes for hours in a day. It's a great way to really involve yourself in the score in a very detailed manner that you don't really get a chance to do in the symphony world. When you do an opera, you're involved with the piece for 3 or 4 weeks. You get to know the people involved very, very, very well. And if you're doing a symphony, on the other hand, you generally start rehearsing a week before the concert, maybe even less than that, and 4 rehearsals in our case, and you do the concert and you're done. So the advantage of doing a symphony job, though, is you end up conducting a lot more because you're doing a concert perhaps every month rather than 3 operas in the entire year.
Now, you also were, you mentioned Champaign.
Mm-hmm.
Was that similar to what you have been doing here?
In theory, it's similar. It's another regional orchestra. It's a smaller market than here. I think the 2 towns combined are about 90,000 people. But of course, the difference in Champaign is that you've got this huge behemoth of this University of Illinois campus. Lots and lots of musicians, both professional and amateur on campus, wonderful performing halls and things like that. The facilities are incredible. And you've got a town where, although there's only 90,000 people as opposed to perhaps 150,000 in Rockford, and that's not counting the surrounding area, you've got a much higher percentage of people who are more likely to be symphony goers or fans of classical music down there. That's the good thing. The bad thing is that there's a lot of competition for time down there. So the thing I remember most about stands out the most is the annual planning meeting where all of the people who use the Cranard Center, the Follinger Center, Great Hall, all the people who use that come together and sit around a big series of round tables and divvy up the dates for the year. And it can be nasty. Everybody wants the prime dates. And everybody is, there's faculty recitals that, although they only maybe get 50 or 60 people coming to the recital, they still want to do their recital in the Great Hall. And then there's always the trombone ensemble that insists they have to do all of their concerts in the Great Hall. And you're dealing with the other orchestras, the bands, everything else. So at the end of that long morning session, you end up with your dates for rehearsals and the performances for the year. And sometimes you don't even get a dress rehearsal in the hall. You just have to go from the rehearsal room to the concert without ever having rehearsed in the hall. So that was an interesting situation.
Well, one thing we know for sure that everything changes over the years. So what did RSO look like, the orchestra look like 30 years ago compared to the way it is now?
younger in some respects.
Yeah.
There were more college-age kids at the time. A lot more NIU students. Well, maybe there weren't a lot of them. Maybe maybe half a dozen or 10 at the most. But a lot of recent NIU grads, and they weren't as good as they are today. Part of the reason for that was that they weren't. The pay was not very good. It's not great now either, but it was particularly dismal back then. With the average, I think the average pay for a musician was about $25 a rehearsal back then. Now, inflation aside, that still wasn't very, very much money. And almost any other orchestra in the Chicago area, greater Northwest, Northern Illinois area, paid more than that. And to make matters worse, the previous conductor had negotiated individual agreements with people he really wanted, so some people were making a lot more than that. And of course, this gets out. You know, you're getting $75 per rehearsal. I'm only getting 25. What is this? So that was the situation. It wasn't a bad orchestra back then. I remember that from thinking about that from my first rehearsal. That the audition, that it really wasn't a bad orchestra. They really had potential. It responded well, but one of the things it didn't need at that time, I think that they had 5 rehearsals scheduled for each concert. And I said, you don't need 5 rehearsals. If you can't do it in 4, you have no business calling yourself an orchestra. This isn't a community orchestra. This is higher standards than that. So we've been doing 4 ever since.
Okay, so 30 years ago, you're here with this new orchestra, a new orchestra for you anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first thing you wanted to accomplish, and what kind of timeline was it?
The first thing I wanted to accomplish is to sort of set a new tone for the orchestra. Without bad-mouthing my predecessor, I've always said that he was an easy act to follow because all you had to do was be nice to people, and they kind of fell over in a dead fate. So that was one thing, just restoring morale in the orchestra, and also dealing with the finances. The board at that time, which wasn't really even sure that the orchestra was going to be able to continue to exist, gave me a budget and said, here's the money, put together a season. And I sat down and worked and figured out that, well, cutting to 4 rehearsals rather than 5, and cutting the size of the orchestra, and doing a concert that maybe involved 50 or 55 musicians, and then a concert that involved 75 or 80, and not mixing the repertoire so that everything required 75 or 80 musicians. You could stretch out that money for the season in such a way that everybody got a pay raise. Everybody got a pay raise. And so the first thing that they found out is that, wow, I'm doubling what I was getting paid before. I think it was actually more than that. So that was a great shot in the arm for people. People like that. And then it was Bob Frederickson, Bob Frederickson was the regional head of Commonwealth Edison at the time, and he was our board president whose job was to rebuild the orchestra and to get it back on track again. And I remember going around with Bob to all sorts of civic leaders and heads of banks and everything in Rockford, sitting down and getting lectured by them all about what a lousy organization the Rockford Symphony has been and how we've got to do better. So we promised to do better, and I think that we did. So it was a rebuilding year.
All right, let's continue to think back to that time. So why did the Register Star refer to you as the Renaissance man when you arrived? I'm sure it didn't have anything to do with you wearing puffy shouldered shirts and capes and knee-length pants. I'm sure it was more to it than that.
No, no. I think it was because I had come from, I was an opera conductor. I had done symphony concerts. Symphony. I was for 13 years. I was the conductor of a community orchestra in Chicago called the Lakeshore Symphony. I had primarily been doing opera and guest conducting opera in other cities. I'd also been an administrator, and frankly, the greater part of my job, most of my time, was spent as an administrator with Chicago Opera Theater. So the conducting only happened a couple of times a year, and the rest of the time I was planning and planning budgets and payrolls and things like that, and planning repertoire for the future. So I don't remember exactly what they wrote in that article, but I think that was probably why, because I come from several different backgrounds.
Okay, good. Margot, don't you have some pictures you'd like to show?
Oh God.
We do have some pictures.
Margot,
We got some
I know where
pictures.
you live.
Yeah, you didn't know about this, but
Michelle put these together.
that's the way it goes.
Here we go. We have this one.
Oh my, yeah, I remember that.
I'll do anything to sell tickets.
That's a nice picture from the Register Star. That's a look.
Oh,
Yeah, I was about 24, 25, I think, when that picture was taken. My afro
Relaxing, Steve.
with brown hair. Yeah.
White jacket.
I don't even know where that is.
I don't either.
Oh, I think it's the Milwaukee Symphony.
Okay.
Okay.
Nutcracker.
Yeah.
Classic headshot.
Surprised?
Midway.
Yeah.
Another Nutcracker. This one's black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Another Midway. Rick Nielsen at Midway.
Mm-hmm.
There you are, a regular guy in a stuffy business. See, I think that's the end.
those are great. Those are great pictures. Hey, does anybody have any questions for Steve? Somebody must have a question.
You can unmute and ask it, or you can type it in the chat.
Yeah, either way. Well, meanwhile, while you're trying to possibly think of questions, I've got another one. When you did arrive here, you, of course, started at the Midway Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And then you moved to the Coronado. So how are those two venues different in terms of the performances and the preparation and all other kinds of things?
That's a long, interesting story. The orchestra has a history of performing in several different places, including a stint at the Coronado before renovation. One of the things that almost killed the orchestra was at some time in the 80s, the Metro Center was built, was completed, and the brilliant idea that somebody came up with is, let's move the symphony's concerts to the Metro Center. And somebody built a makeshift shell, which was, I guess, quite elaborate. An engineer built a shell that's around the orchestra. And everybody came into the Metro Center to hear concerts. And the creaky aluminum bleachers made a lot of noise. The sound was terrible. And I don't remember the exact figures, but in 1 year, subscriptions for the symphony dropped at least 50%, maybe more than that. I don't remember the exact figures now. Everybody said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. So the Coronado at that time was very, very inadequate. The backstage was very small. The sound was not very good. It was never designed to be a musical theater. The backstage was so small, and there had a very steep staircase going downstairs. There's a great story that Arthur Fiedler guest conducted the Rockford Symphony once in the, I believe in the 70s. They were performing at the Coronado, and at intermission, Fiedler wanted to have his usual schnapps, so he had his glass of whiskey. And then he wanted to use the bathroom, and they showed him where the stairs were. And he said, I'm not going down there. So they had to form a circle around him, so while Arthur Fiedler peed in the bucket backstage because he wasn't going to go downstairs. Anyway, the Midway actually had some potential. It was basically a shoebox. It used to be the largest theater in Rockford, holding over 2,000 people, 2,000 seats. Well over that, actually. But it cut down the number of seats when the stage was built. Marv, oh, and I can't remember Marv's name, bought the Midway Theater. He owned Lloyd's Hearing Aids right next door.
Palmquist.
Yes, Palmquist, yes. And he had the great dreams of that being a concert hall, but ran out of money. The stage was huge. It was magnificent. You could put an enormous orchestra on there. The backstage was almost non-existent. The sound was not horrible. It wasn't great either. But we just, it never really gelled, never really held together there. When we finally moved to the Coronado with the sound system and the shell and everything, the orchestra got 50% better like in every rehearsal. It just got better and better and better. By the end of the first week there, we were so much better than we were before we moved it. It was just amazing. That was the big turnaround, 2001.
Terrific.
Now, there is a question in the chat. Steve, the question is, what, if any, interaction did you have with your predecessor, Charles Bornstein?
None whatsoever. I attended a concert in February he conducted, the year that it was shortly before I auditioned. Attended one concert and never met him.
There you go.
I think he probably wanted it that way. So.
Any other questions?
This is Linnell. Don't have my picture up. My question was, so it sounded like it was a little shaky when you first came, as far as people thinking whether the orchestra was going to survive. When did it become unshaky? After 1 year, 2 years?
I would say probably after 1 year. The audiences began picking up immediately. The finances stabilized. Organizations that had stopped giving to the orchestra began contributing again. So things were, my budget that year was $250,000, give or take $10,000. And in 5 years, the budget was $500,000. So it doubled in maybe 4 years. So things immediately began to get better.
Good.
We added concerts. I think the second year we did our first Pops concert, Holiday Pops concert, began adding Pops concerts after that. So we ended up with 3 per year.
Thanks.
Sure.
Another question? Anyone? Well, that's terrific. We certainly want to thank everyone for the questions and for being with us today on our first installment of the Legacy of Steven Larsen Zoom series. And of course, this is not the only one. We have 3 more coming up. The next one, the second installment, on Zoom, of course, will be on Friday, November 20th at noon, when we will be focusing on the musicians. So we hope to see all of you then, and be sure to tell your friends and have them come along also. Steve, it's great to see you again.
Likewise.
So everyone, please stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.